Alrighty, and hello everyone to the reading of the prologue of Star Trek Destiny of Gods of Night, where we'll just be reading the prologue tonight. Then afterwards, we'll have a little discussion on it here. And then once we get to more chapters in, we'll read the comments from the previous iteration or videos. So with that, start with the prologue. 2373. Prologue. It was a lifeless husk, its back broken, its skin its skin rent, its mammoth form half buried in the shifting sands of a mountainous dune, and it was even more beautiful than Jadzia Dax remembered. Her second host, Tobin Dax, had watched the Earth starship Columbia NX-02 leave its space dock more than 200 years earlier on what no one had realized would be its final mission. Tobin had directed the calibration of its starboard warp coils. A pang of sad nostalgia colored Jadzia's thoughts as she stood on the ground in vessel's bow and gazed at its shattered starboard nacelle, which had buckled at its midpoint and lay partially reclaimed by the dry waves of the desert. Engineers from the Defiant swarmed over the primary hull of the Columbia. They took tricorder readings, in between shielding their faces from the scorching lash of the sand-laced Sirocco. Behind them lay the delicate peaks of the desolate landscape, a vista of wheat-colored dunes shaped by the unceasing tide of ambiotic winds, barren and lonely beneath a blanched sky. Jadzia counted herself lucky that Captain Sisko had been willing to approve another planetary survey so soon after she had accidentally led them into peril on Gaia, where 8,000 lives had since been erased from history on a lover's capricious whim. Though the crew was eager to return to Deep Space Nine as quickly as possible, Dak's curiosity was always insatiable once aroused, and a flicker of a sensor reading had drawn her to this unnamed uninhabited planet. A sudden gust whipped her long dark ponytail over her shoulder. She swatted it away from her face as she squinted into the blinding crimson flare of the rising suns. Adding to the brightness was a shimmer of light with a humanoid shape. A few meters away from her, the high pitched drone of a transporter beam was drowned out by the wailing of the wind in minor chords. As she as the sound and the shine faded away, the silhouette of Benjamin Sisko strode towards her across the buckled hull plates. Quite a quite a find, old man, he said, his mood subdued. Under normal circumstances, he would have been elated by a discovery such as this, but the sting of recent events was too fresh and the threat of war too imminent for any of them to take much joy of it in it. He looked around and then asked, "How things going?" Slowly, Dax said. Our loadout was for recon, not salvage. She started walking and nodded for him to follow her. We're seeing some unusual subatomic damage in the hull. Not sure what it means yet. All we know for sure is that the Columbia has been here for about 200 years. They reached forward, edge of the primary hull, where the force of impact had peeled back the metallic skin of the starship to reveal its duranium subframe. There's Defiance engineers had installed a broad ramp and a shallow incline because the ship's original personnel hatches were all choked with stitches of wind-blown sand. As they descended into the ship, Cisco asked, "Have you been able to identify any of the crew?" Echoes of the footfalls were muffled tapped in the hollow beneath the ramp. We haven't found any bodies, Dax said, talking over the atonal cries of the wind smacking through the Columbia's corridors. No remains of any kind. Her footsteps scraped across grit-covered deck plates as she led him towards the ship's core. A dusty haze in the air was penetrated at irregular angles by narrow beams of sunlight that found their way through the dark wreckage. As they moved further from the sparse light and deeper into the murky shadows of D deck, Dax thought she saw brief flashes of bluish light moving behind the bent bulkheads as the edges of her vision. When she turned her head to look for them, however, she found only darkness, and she diminished the flickers as residual images pulling her retinas as her eyes adapted to the darkness near the ship's core. Is it possible, Cisco asked, stepping over the curved obstacle of a collapsed bulkhead brace, that the abandoned ship had settled somewhere on the planet? Maybe, Dax said, but most of their gear is still on board. She pushed past the tangle of fallen cables and held it aside for Cisco as he followed her. This desert goes on for 900 kilometers in every direction, she continued. Between you and me, I don't think they have gotten very far with just the clothes on their backs. That's a good point, but I think it's mute, Cisco said as they rounded the curve into the length of corridor draped in cobwebs and disturbed a thick broad of small but lethal looking indigenous arthropods. The 10-legged creatures rapidly scurried into the cracks between the bulkheads and the deck. He and Dex continued walking. I don't expect to find any survivors from the 200-year-old wreck, and I would like to know what an old Warp 5 Earthship is doing in the Gamma Quadrant. That makes two of us, Dex said as she turned another corridor to a dead end where Miles O'Brien, hunched beneath a low hanging tangle of wires and antiquated circuit boards, the remains of the control panel of the Columbia's main computer. Chief, Dex called out, announcing their approach. Any luck? Not yet, said the stout engineer. His tightly cut, curly, fair hair was matted with sweat and dust. The two officers stepped up behind him, and he continued in his gruff Irish brogue. The damn museum piece of is what it is. Our tricores can't talk to it, and I can't find an adapter in Defiance databases that'll fit these inputs. Cisco leaned in beside O'Brien, supporting himself with his right hand on the chief's left shoulder. Dax hovered behind O'Brien's right side. The captain stroked his wiry goatee once and said, Are the memory banks intact? O'Brien started a chortle and caught himself. Well, they're here, he said. Whenever they work, who knows? I can't even power them up with the parts you have on hand. Dax asked, How long will it take to make an adapter? Just for power? Brian said, 3 hours, maybe four. I'd have to do some research to make it work with our EPS grid. He turned away from the Gordon nod of electronics to face Dax. Cisco, getting us data is going to be a real challenge. Nobody worked with a core like this in over a century. Give me a number, Chief. Cisco said, How long? Brian shrugged. A couple days at least. Cisco's jaw had tightened. He was worried on the brown forehead grew deeper as he expressed his disapproval with a frown. That's not an answer I was looking for, he said. Best I could do, O'Brien said. With a heavy sigh and a slump of his shoulders, Cisco seemed to surrender to the inevitable. Fine, he said. Keep at it, Chief. Let us know if it makes any progress. Aye, sir, O'Brien said, and he turned his back to his work. Desk and Cisco returned the way they came, and they were met at the intersection by Major Kira. A Bajoran woman had been in charge of the search teams looking for the crew's remains. Her rose-colored militia uniform was streaked with dark gray smears of dirt and grime. The faint speckling of dust clung to her short, close-cropped red hair. We finished our sweep, she said, her eyes darting nervously back down the corridor. There's no sign of the crew or anyone else. What about combat damage? Said Cisco. Maybe they were boarded and captured. Kira shook her head quickly. I don't think so. All the damage I saw fits with a crash landing. There are no blast effects on the internal bulkheads, no marks from weapons fire. Whatever happened here, it wasn't a firefight. Nodding forward towards the route to the exit, she added. Can we get out of here now? What's wrong, Major? Said Cisco, whose attention had sharpened in response to Kira's apparent agitation. The Bajoran woman cast a fearful look down the corridor from behind and frowned as she turned back towards Cisco and Dax. There's something in here, she said. I can't explain it, but I can feel it. Glaring, suspicious at the overhead, she added. There are Borhayas watching us. Cisco protested. A ghost? He, as tolerant as he tried to be of Kira's religious convictions, he sometimes grew exasperated with the willingness to embrace superstition. Are you really telling me that you think the ship is haunted? I don't know, Kira said, seemingly frustrated at having to justify her instincts to her friends. But I heard things, and I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and I keep seeing blank of light in the dark. Dex got a blue flashes. Yes, Kira said, sounding excited by Dak's confirmation. Cisco took his head and resumed walking forward. I've heard enough, he said. Let's get back to the Defiant. Kira and Dax fell into a step behind him as they walked back into the compartment through which they had entered, the Columbia. Cisco moved at the quick step, and Dax had to work to keep pace with him as he headed for the ramp topside. Benjamin, Dax said, I think we need to make more detailed study of the ship. If I had a little bit more time, maybe the chief and I could find a way to use Defiance tractor beams to lift the Columbia back to orbit. And she was cut off by the chirping of Cisco's combat, followed by Worf's voice. Defiant to Captain Cisco, Worf said over the con. Cisco answered without breaking straight. Go ahead. Long range sensors have detected two Jem'Hadar warships approaching this system, Worf said. ETA 9 minutes. Sound yellow alert and start beaming up the engineers, Cisco said as he climbed the ramp to the blaze daylight. Wait for my order to beam up the command team. Acknowledged, Worf said. Define out. Back atop the crash deformed hull, Cisco stopped and turned towards Dax. Sorry, old man. The salvage has to wait. Kira asked, should we plant demolitions? Dax and Cisco reacted to the confused expressions, prompting Kira to elaborate. To prevent the Jem'Hadar from capturing the ship. I doubt they'll find much more than we did, Cisco said. Columbia is over 200 years old, Major, and technically it's not even a Federation vessel. He lifted his arm to shade his eyes from the morning suns. Besides, it's kept its secret since long. We can leave it be. Dax watched as he walked towards the apex of the primary hull. All around him, in groups of 4 or 5, teams of engineers faded away in luminescent shimmers, transported back to the orbiting Defiant. The outline of Cisco's body dissolved in the sun's glare till the captain was just a stick figure in front of the sky of fire. Kira walked beside him on his right, as familiar and comfortable as someone who had always been there. Cisco's voice emanated from Deck's comm edge. Command team, stand by for beam up. The broken gray majesty of the Columbia lay beneath Dax's feet, an empty tomb, harboring secrets untold. It pained her to abandon its mysteries before she had time to unravel them. But the Dominion was on the move, and war made its own demands. Alrighty, so that is the prologue. We actually learned quite a bit in that one. We find the Columbia, 200-year-old ship that shouldn't be in the Gamma Quadrant, and we're talking thousands of light years on. It's been found on a desolate planet. We know that war is approaching. They keep saying they see something. It makes you wonder: is that going to be important for later on? Because frankly, I can't remember. So no, I can't even spoil it for you. So there, you know, and just think just one little thing on the on the sensor there contacts his attention. It's just the little details like that. So we know this is 2373 right before the Dominion War. So I wonder how much of a factor that's going to take into place. Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. We'll have to wonder what the Columbia was doing in the Gamma Quadrant. So with that, you guys have a good night, and remember to be a gorilla.